Everybody, Bethany Dotson, relationship coach and trauma sensitive yoga therapist. And I am here today with my fabulous client, Christine Schneider. Christine, thank you so much for agreeing to be here today.
Thank you for
and
having
sharing
me.
your experience. Of course. One of the very first questions, to just give some context for people who are listening, is I always like to ask what your life, emotional health, what your life relationship wise, what life was like before we started working together, before you decided to book a call and join Break the Cycle. So give us a little insight about what life was like before.
Sure. Before I met Bethany, I lived in this kind of constant state of trying to hack my life, meaning just constantly trying to improve and fix things, like always feeling like everything needed fixing. And I'll warn you guys, I'm a crier. It's going to happen. I already feel it. Only feeling like I need to fix myself, fix my life, and trying to control the outcome all the time. But it was exhausting, so I was always exhausted. I felt a lot of times I didn't actually have anything to give because of the busy. And yes, depleted is probably the best word for it.
Yeah.
And then also, because my body was so tired often, I couldn't keep doing. And then I felt an immense amount of guilt and shame for not being able to push through and continue to do.
Really fascinating. And I find it so interesting, especially the last bit of what you just shared, the shame spiral, the shame cycle that happens, the internal self beat up when we feel like we're not measuring up. And I think a lot of people will relate to that. We're not doing enough or not being good enough. Yeah. And the internal critic that happens. One thing you also mentioned that I want to highlight, you mentioned fixing. And would you mind sharing with people what it is that you do professionally?
I'm a ex-opera singer, now musician, and I work in internal medicine, also subspecialty of nephrology, which is kidneys.
Yes. Thank you for clarifying that. Yes. I think a lot of women who have experienced dysfunctional relationships identify with being a fixer. And I know I've worked a lot with people who've been in healthcare in some form or fashion, or in some type of helping profession. And can you say just a little glimpse of how, and the control, the fixing and the control, how that showed up in your last intimate relationship?
Yeah, what often would happen is I personally was attracted to people that were also doers, but not necessarily emotionally available to me. So then I would spend a whole lot of mental energy after the honeymoon phase, that sort of thing. Once things started to not be like, the fear started setting in that this wasn't going to work out, I started trying to fix them. Spent a lot of mental energy wondering what they were thinking about, or with how they felt about me, or how I could change how they felt about me, or how I could be different so that they would like me, or diagnosing them. Basically, I spent a lot of time diagnosing.
Yeah. And I think a lot of women, especially a lot of women who will watch this, can identify with trying to fix their partner, realizing, and it's usually earlier than most people would like to admit publicly, that the relationship isn't probably going to work out, and then having that fear set in and that gripping of fear. And no, let me try to make it, and how that parallels with how you operate in other life areas. So yeah. And I find it interesting. You said they are also doers. The partners that you have attracted, to the people that you tend to attract, are also doers, but then also ultimately unavailable. And when we spend a lot of time fixing others or pouring into other people, and then feeling like on some level we're still not doing good enough, we are essentially unavailable for ourselves. We ultimately always attract, like it or not, some version of what we are, not what we ultimately want. Thank you for sharing what your experience was like before. And I'd like to pivot and tell us a little bit about what life is like now, how you are internally. Like, how have you shifted?
I have shifted away from. I'm still working through the doing.
Absolutely.
Particularly in the last week or so, I've been shifting away from feeling like I need to hack it, like I need to figure it out,
Yeah.
and allowing it to be there. I'm calmer. I'm sleeping better. I am a lot more just aware of. I'm more available for life, I guess, is what I mean.
Yeah. And did you feel like you were available for life when you first enrolled or before?
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And can you give, if you're comfortable, specific examples of how you feel like you're more available for life?
Not as in my head all the time. And because that took so much energy from me, I have more energy to give to my son, to my patients. I have more patience, not with a T on the end, but I my tank feels full almost all the time.
Yeah.
And of course there'll be times when it gets a little bit harder, but I feel like I have the tools now to deal with it, and that when it is hard, it turns around fairly quickly and I'm back to having a full tank.
Yeah. And you co-parent with your ex.
I do.
Yes. Do you, and you also have parents who may or may not be. Yes. So you have family. So can you say a little blurb about how that's, how you're showing up differently there, if
Sure.
you are showing up differently?
My parents are still together. In terms of my my parents, I have a difficult relationship with my I've had a difficult relationship with my mother in the past, and a lot of it, I think that she was another both of them were products of their own traumas. And I, particularly in the last time my parents came to visit, I it was so much smoother because I wasn't looking for them to fill the hole like I had been before, and that I felt much more able to fill that in myself. And so I wasn't asking anything of them, really.
Yeah.
And not that there was never any triggers happening. We're all still human, but it just, I had so much more like understanding, and I felt like it was reciprocated. And yeah, that's one way. In terms of co-parenting, it's the same thing. I think that I behaved as like a starving child, just demanding food all the time when someone else maybe didn't have it to give. And then they would get kind of depleted not being able to give that to me because they too were give pleasers and doers. And yeah, so we've just had a much smoother time. We've always been friends. There's been times when it's gotten real ugly, but we've had a real smooth time in terms of co-parenting, and I don't rely on him for my entire. I'm not outsourcing my happiness to him.
Yes. And I like the word that you used. I'm not outsourcing my happiness to him. And could it be true that you are more efficient at generating that happiness from within and not seeking the approval, the validation from other people? You use the word, I'm like the little girl, like starving for like that energy. Could it be said that you are more efficient now at generating that happiness from within?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's really important because I feel like a lot of people get stuck in the depletion mode and survival mode when they're out of a bad relationship or out of some kind of dysfunctional relationship. And they have the habit of fixing people that they're just so in the depletion mode that, yeah. So tell us quickly about some challenges. Like, what were challenges for you in learning to arrive at this point? What specific challenges did you face that you felt like you had to overcome?
I have a very creative brain, and she has lots of knowledge. She strings that knowledge together in a creative way in order to prove to herself what she already thinks. And again, very active and always sometimes they call it overthinking. So guilty, often having to not quite knowing how to shut that part off and really just be in that moment with myself, in touch with who I am at my core and what I'm feeling in my body.
Yeah. And I also want to stack on that a lot of people who have maybe a pattern of unavailability in their relationships can have the tendency of being over analytical because they're on high. I want to get my needs met. Are you going to leave me? Are you going to do something wrong? I want to get my needs met. And so they tend to be up here, and there's nothing wrong with that. However, when we're up here, we tend to miss a lot of subtle information and cues that our body is giving us. And we're such sensory creatures, like we feel things and we're constantly being bombarded with different sensory things that are going to trigger us. Yeah. And it's really important, especially when it comes to dating, again, to be really in tune with your body and the feelings, the sensations that you're getting from your body, and not jumping up here to overanalyze or talk your way out of that. What would you, in terms of words of wisdom, what would you tell somebody who may also be a fixer, who may also be overly critical on themselves and get stuck in a shame spiral, who also has had a pattern of unavailability in their relationships and dissatisfaction and getting into narcissistic relationships even? What words of wisdom would you tell that person?
There's a way. There's a way to feel better. And it actually doesn't it takes showing up and it takes feeling hard feelings. But there's nothing that, like, sometimes I feel like, is that all? I'm just supposed to be there with it? I'm not supposed to crack it open and pretzel myself because that doesn't feel right. I try to do it anyway. And then, yeah, I never thought that I could feel like this, particularly after the last couple years. So this has been a revelation for me.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Yeah. And super proud of you. And it's been such a joy to work with you and watch your transformation. And I know only great things await you. And I know you'll take this new version. It's like you're shedding a skin, like your snake is shedding the skin, right? I know you'll take this version of you out there into the world. And I know it's already showing up for you at work and with co-parenting and your parents, and it will show up when you begin dating again. So thank you so much for contributing and sharing your experience and making an impact today.